I'm asking this week, whose budget is it that's being presented in Parliament now? The 2022-23 budget is edging close to $1 trillion. The more than $900 billion is said to be nearly 3% more than last year's voted expenditure. But remember immediately that inflation is running close to 7%. In fact, we now know it's closer to 10%. And this means that this year's bigger money will buy less than last year's smaller money. You digest that. And then, of course, there's the crawling devaluation, which makes it worse. But whose interests do the budgets serve? Are we spending the money in the best way? For instance, the Ministry of Finance has promised more money to the public sector workers. Now that's fair. But how is it going to be afforded? More tax on what? Fuel? Listen now, don't even joke. And with what specific conditions for increased productivity will anybody be getting a raise? Or will it be more money for the same inadequate service as we have become accustomed? Who will bear the brunt of taxes? The already rich people or the chronically poor? As usual. But let's go behind the annual boring budget process. What is the end game of economic policy in this, our 60th year of nationhood? Is it to provide the basic services conducive to everyone becoming rich? Well, that would be a serious joke, wouldn't it? The way the system is set, we are becoming more unequal in Jamaica. More people are becoming marginalized. And don't bother with the COVID excuse either. That COVID has only made a chronically bad situation worse. What is our concept of riches anyway, I want to ask us? If our children and our young people follow our rulers and the stimuli of the media, we should all be striving for a big house, a crisp car, enough US, a visa, more things, including, most likely, for many, a gun. And it is the stark absence of these that are at the heart of our social distress, if those are the values of many of us. So keep in mind the basic question as to where we want this budget to be a step towards, as we consider, as a contrast, the clarity of the Chinese Communist Party on the same issue. They speak of two no worries. Two. What are those two no worries? Food and clothing. And then their policy is accompanied by three guarantees. What are those? Compulsory quality education, that's one, adequate health care, and safe housing. Two no worries. Nobody should have to worry about food and clothing. And three guarantees: education, health care, and housing. And I'm asking you and asking myself, do we have these same aspirations? If we do, how is the state which is our collective selves, administered by a government, using our money to help us all to achieve these ends? Were we to ask ourselves if these are worthy objectives for our political economy, would it mean that we would be promoting the Chinese style of governance? No, not at all. But these are basic human needs for citizens to flourish, aren't they? Food, clothing, education, health, housing. And we say our system is superior. So shouldn't we critique every budget, indeed the whole texture of state activity, to see how we are achieving these kinds of ends? And please don't insult our intelligence by suggesting that the hurried and perfunctory consideration by the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee of Parliament fulfills that road. I consider a national budget to be a sacred manifesto which should be grounded on a deep philosophical and theological ideology which promotes the respect and dignity of all citizens, especially the weakest. That's why I raise these issues of budget and political economy on a YouTube channel which has to do with religious consciousness, eh? And I'm asking, do the estimates of expenditure which have been tabled and the revenue measures which are soon to follow, do they reflect those principles? Principles which respect the dignity of all citizens, especially the weakest? Hello, the budget is a profoundly theological instrument. And the concept of the common good needs to underlay every line in the budget, not the demands of special interests or partisan concerns. And this approach stands at the opposite end of the ideological spectrum from the amoral market fundamentalism, which seems to be our guiding light in Jamaica. Did you hear the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce argue against having a minimum wage even? The market must determine that. And when the market spits out the majority of our people to poverty, to lack of food, clothing, housing, education, and then what? We expect social peace? We think that's righteous? Well, several current happenings should be taken into account to provide a context for this budget exercise. For example, a recent United States government narcotics report tells the American Congress that, quote, Jamaican law penalizes corruption, but in practice, corruption remains entrenched and widespread. Listen to this, even among senior government officials, end quote. Now I'm asking you, can we refute that? And if not, are we even ashamed anymore? How does this charge figure in the big spend on national security and in the pretty throne speech we've heard? Not to mention the recent revelations from the Firearms Licensing Authority. I'm a part of a group of educators who are analyzing in detail the high school examination results over the past few years. Let me tell you, they are grim. Even though the standards have been watered down and not all leaving students even take the exams, much less pass them, a very high percentage of the passes in crucial subjects like mathematics are at the bare grade 3 level. And the failure rate is embarrassing. Government is telling us, or is it we telling ourselves, to suck up the hardship because one day soon, when? There will be more jobs, greater productivity, and better opportunity to achieve Chinese-style no worries and guarantees. But none of this can happen unless we acknowledge, for the first time at last, the connection between family stability and success in school. Until we acknowledge our children's serious language problem, until we stop teaching children just how to pass exams while ignoring the low level of reasoning skills, which is apparent even in our better schools. So the current and the inevitable cry for the postponement of the PEP exam is the clearest admission of the loss of almost 2 years of schooling despite all previous denials. But what is unforgivable is the unwillingness to repeat the lessons lost. This comes at a heavy cost. There is pitifully little evidence of how to meet this crisis in the proposed budget. And there's so much more. The continued wasting of our land by bauxite mining with uncertain returns and no capacity or will to enforce restoration is apparently supported by both government and opposition. The half-hearted commitment to agricultural resurrection, the abandonment of efficient public transportation, and the waste of foreign exchange to import cars to burn the fuel that we can't afford to pay for? Where do the wrenching, disruptive but transformational discussions on these and other issues figure in the budget theater now at hand? And are they even possible in an atmosphere of tribal partisanship? What is a good life that Jamaicans seek? I ask myself and other Christians. Are our aspirations fair and sustainable? Are we on the right path to achieve them? Well, here's some good advice. Quote, stand firm and do not take on yourselves the yoke of slavery a second time. For the whole law has found its fulfillment in this one saying, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. If you go on biting and tearing one another to pieces, take care. You will end up in mutual destruction. That's Paul's letter to the Galatians, chapter 5, verse 14. It's good advice. In Jesus' name.